So something pretty interesting happened over the past couple days. Todd Howard did an interview.
Is that I think we're pretty in sync with our fans in terms of what we're doing, what they want to see, and the things that give us joy when we're playing the games.
And it's not that this is rare or uncommon. He does a lot of interviews around game releases and, of course, leading up to them. But right now is kind of an odd time to do an interview and especially reveal as much as he did. The interview is with the AIAS Game Maker's Notebook. They have a lot of other people on from the industry, and a lot of these guys being pretty big name and working on some pretty amazing games. Todd Howard, if you don't know, is the creative head at Bethesda Game Studios and is one of the main minds behind things like Fallout 4 and The Elder Scrolls. Again, if you guys don't know, he's more or less just the boss of Bethesda Game Studios. In this interview, he got pretty friendly, and they definitely went into some of the stuff they are currently working on. He didn't really name specifics. He never got like, oh, hey, yeah, this is the genre or the theme of our next game. But he did reveal some things, some more minor details, and really just other things. He made some analogies and said some things that I feel like actually lend us to believing that something could be coming. I'm going to provide you with all of the audio clips. Again, these are all from this original podcast, which you do have down below. It's a really good listen. If you guys are like on the fence about it, I would definitely listen to it. Maybe if you're like doing some mundane tasks, it's really interesting, and I left a lot out. I really only focused on the stuff for their upcoming games, but he actually talks a lot about the community, the modding community, and things like that. So starting things off, just a few of the miscellaneous details that he kind of mentions. He talks about how a game takes 3 to 5 years.
If you, I think most developers who have worked on games that take, 3 to 5 years that our stuff takes.
I found this to be a somewhat important factoid because it kind of gives you a frame of reference as to how long it actually takes Bethesda to produce these games.
We wanted something that felt like you were really lockpicking and not frustrating in the way the Oblivion one was. And we really like that one to the point where we use it now.
They talk about something that, in my eyes, actually might indicate that lockpicking will be in the next game. Again, it's pretty open to interpretation. They more or less were just talking about lockpicking and how Skyrim and Fallout's lockpicking system was really intuitive and enjoyable. Then we get into the real bread and butter of this interview, where they actually talk about not having multiple teams or how they never really had multiple teams in the past.
Yeah, that's one of the things where we've never had multiple teams. Back Bethesda long ago we did, and it didn't go well. You got very different cultures on different teams, and...
Or rather, never really had successful multiple teams. That they had multiple teams, but it almost led to the shutdown of the studio. It also seems like this podcast was recorded before the BGS Austin announcement. Even though it only came out yesterday, it doesn't seem like he actually mentions that when mentioning some of the other studios.
We have the main group in Rockville, we have the studio in Montreal, we work with other parts of ZeniMax. Escalation was a studio, and there's other people throughout the larger Bethesda that are working on our game, so it's over 300 full-time now, which is unique for us.
And that's interesting because he mentions how there's 300 people working full-time for him or for Bethesda. Many of those, or at least a majority of them, actually working on a new AAA game. So that's massive. That's a really big indication of something. Fallout 4, for reference, only had 100 full-time people working on it. This is 3 times that, and of course there's other side projects going on. But later in the podcast, they actually further this almost by saying that they always have one project that they're just kind of focusing all of their resources on. They very rarely have 2 projects being worked on in tandem on a full load.
Well, we're never doing them completely in parallel.
Yeah.
So there's always one project that's in pre-production, maybe for years, and another one we have in full production, where the bulk of the team is on it, and then some people might be focusing on pre-production on something else. And those are different skill sets.
That's honestly what I suspected was going on. They mentioned how they wanted to build a bunch of games, so I kind of assumed they were just developing 2 in tandem. In reality, one is getting a lot of the attention, while the other ones are still in their pre-production stages. One other thing Todd talks a bit about is mobile games, and how they're actually always pretty much now going to be making a mobile game, and they have a certain subset of people working on that.
Mobile's a little bit separate, but we still pull people into it. We'll pull an artist off of Fallout 4 to work on Fallout Shelter, okay. Or the designer. People say, well, let's make a smaller game. We do some mobile stuff now, which I think are smaller games, but they're growing in what their scale, what they can do, and how many people play them. And I think we'll always have a mobile game in development, just like we do on the larger AAA console PC side, where we're overlapping stuff. We're doing that on mobile now. I really enjoy it, faster throw, but
I found this really interesting. Fallout Shelter obviously was a pretty big release from the guys over at Bethesda Game Studios. It was kind of a tandem launch leading up to Fallout 4, but even still gets updates more so than Fallout 4 almost. And I think that was a very successful launch for them. I've speculated, as with many others, that the next Bethesda Game Studios announcement, which hopefully, and I think is going to be coming at this E3, will also have like a mobile game come out at E3. So you can play the mobile game that has a similar kind of setting or something similar to the fully fledged game, and then eventually play the AAA game when it gets released. This doesn't necessarily confirm that, but the fact that they said they're always going to be focusing on mobile games means that we're probably going to be seeing something at E3 that is mobile. And then we get into two of these sound clips that I think are actually really indicative or may really shed some light on a new game being announced at this coming E3.
Take an animation system change that we're doing right now. We're finishing for one of our projects, though that's a project that's in pre-production, getting a new animation system, whereas the one that's in full production is using the old one. But those people look, and what happens though is that fuels them.
So there, Todd more or less was talking about an animation system. They're talking a bit about animations, and he mentioned how they're finishing one up on the project that they have fully going on now, while there's a brand new animation system being implemented into one of the pre-production projects that's probably still multiple years away. That's the first instance he kind of references something being wrapped up, and then there's a second one that I think is a little bit more damning.
Same thing.
That is cool. What a great way to show people that, our problems don't really change.
Or I have to remind myself. It's like you forget.
Yeah.
If you move, you haven't moved in a while. Moving is terrible. Packing and moving, or having a child, not terrible, but the pressures of it and those are you forget how hard it is to finish a game.
So there they're talking about problems in game development. Specifically, Todd's talking about how wrapping up a game has certain challenges that pretty much always stay the same, but he makes that analogy to moving, saying like it's good, you're moving on to something else after you finish this, but at the same time it's still difficult to kind of close everything out. I don't think this necessarily confirms a new game, but I think this is a pretty big indicator that Bethesda are wrapping up a game right now, and with E3 3 months away, this would be around the time period they'd be wanting to do so and actually present it at E3. This honestly convinced me. Maybe I am looking way too deeply into this or reading way too deeply into it, but it sounds like Todd Howard is thinking about the process or talking about the process he's undergoing right now at Bethesda as they do finish up their game. It would make sense. The last time he would have had to do this would be about 4 years ago when he was wrapping up Fallout 4. 4 years is a long time, maybe not in game development time, but in real world time, you probably forget some of the issues or struggles that happened 4 years ago because for the past 4 years, you've been in development mode, not wrapping up mode. So the next question is, well, if we are getting a new game, what's it going to be all about? And I feel like some other parts of the interview actually indicate that this is going to be a new IP.
I still like worlds that aren't completely realistic, that they, whether that's science fiction, fantasy, or historical ones I like more than, not that that's not real, but it's not modern day. I enjoy the modern day stuff in games, I think GTA is great and things like that, but I like to figure out what makes a world tick.
Okay.
And then how I would touch that. So we made a list when we were back doing the Elder Scrolls Online, right before we got Fallout. And we gained a lot of pressure. Not pressure, we wanted to. Like, we're going to do something else. Let's make the list of here are the things that we would like to do one day. And Fallout, post-apocalyptic was at the top of it.
They did mention how they're working on new IPs, but we weren't necessarily confirmed that there was going to be a new IP coming with their next game. Maybe it would be Fallout 5 or a Fallout spinoff or something like that. In the interview, Todd Howard talks about how they developed this list very early on at Bethesda, a couple years ago before they actually started Fallout 3. And on that list, they more or less wrote down a ton of different things that they wanted to work on at some point. And it seems like this new game may actually have been one of the things on that list, somewhat indicating that it is a new IP.
But there's other things in that list, that's what I would say, where some of those we're investigating, that we'd like to try some new things, though we love the worlds of Elder Scrolls and Fallout as well. They're ones that we're not going to leave behind.
But then, of course, he does mention how it's meant to be more in like an alternate reality, based in reality, not totally fake, but at the same time, not historical or anything like that. And one final tidbit, he talks about how he's been watching a lot of Black Mirror lately, and he really likes the concept of that show with that kind of future theme, but not totally future.
But I like, even with that thing, like what makes a world tick, I really like that series Black Mirror.
I feel like that theme overall is pretty common with Bethesda Game Studios. The Fallout franchise and the Elder Scrolls both are pretty close to real-world events. Obviously, the Elder Scrolls can be compared to like medieval times or some of those eras, but of course it has dragons and fantasy and magic, and Fallout is much more close to just modern times or post-apocalyptic future, but of course they have that big diversion event where they went nuclear while we went to like the microchip and all that. Or I guess more specifically the transistor. Either way, that's largely some of the things I took away from the interview. Again, I'm going to have a full link to it down below that you guys can listen to. It's very interesting, and I would highly recommend you guys listen to it if you're interested in Fallout, the Elder Scrolls, or even game development in general. As always, again, I thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.
And so I think the people who know me really well see it full bore. And what they usually say to me is, Todd, it's a good thing you do not have a Twitter account, because you would have committed career suicide several times over by writing what's on your mind.